Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, business, education, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today? Whatever day it is, what week is it? Where are we?
We are in the twilight zone between Christmas and New Year's.
I saw someone refer to it as Twixtmas.
That is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And I hope your Christmas went well. Recovering from it here, getting ready for New Year's, which is New Year's Eve is always spent at home for me. So
yeah.
It's a safe place to be. It is a safe place to be, and especially when you get to be, an old dude. So we're just going to try to push through till 2025.
Yeah, right around the corner. Whether we want to deal with it
come or not.
All right. Well, we have some things to talk about this last week of the year. We are going to talk a little bit about the future of Compass, our own project, and this podcast. There's going to be some changes. We'll talk about that a little bit. We have some updates, and we may call in our producer, Lord Seth Barber, for his expert testimony here. Couple of items right before Christmas that made the holiday a little bit merrier for the state's cannabis retailers, although it may just be a temporary reprieve in some ways. We took a little bit of a deep dive on the school-by-school letter grades that the state handed out the week before Christmas. We talked about those last week. This week we're going to look at the socioeconomics behind it. Also, speaking of schools, Knox County Schools has heard some mixed reactions as they've been seeking input on their new strategic plan. We'll talk about that. The University of Tennessee, the annual economic report that comes out of the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research to the governor was released, and there were some interesting tidbits in there about the state of the state's economy. And Scott, just to start off, I thought we would mention that this is the week of the year that we typically do year-in-review coverage. We have published a couple of stories looking back at goings-on in city and county government and in Knox County Schools, the University of Tennessee, kind of all the major jurisdictions, I guess you could say, that we cover. And I don't think we need to actually talk through all of that here on this podcast, because everything that we cover in those year-in-review stories has been talked about on this podcast during the year, because these were all the major events that happened during the year. But it's always a good exercise, I feel like, at the end of the year to just kind of look back. Sometimes by the time you get to December, you look back and remember things that happened in February. Like, they seem like a real long time ago.
Oh, absolutely. I went through that when I was going back through the city of Knoxville stories and UT stories, going back to the first of the year. It's nice to have all this in one place.
Yeah.
I mean, you can one of the things about the news business that's it's good as you keep moving on to the next thing. But then, the end of the year is a good time to look back and see, what happened over the course of the year with things that, in retrospect, are very important. In some cases, things that may not seem quite as dire or exciting or whatever as did when it came out. So
right, something that was the big story that week, but then other things happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that kind of, almost archival purpose is valuable. For our purposes, I often refer back to our prior coverage of something to remind myself about what happened.
Oh, yeah.
And in these year in review stories, we have lots of links to the coverage we did of the various events as they happen. So it's a good resource that way because you can go there and pretty easily find all of those stories. And something that I'm very conscious of and that we probably need to talk about here at Compass is creating and providing an archive for the future. And that's something we have talked before about maybe figuring out how we could archive Compass with like the Knox County Library or one of our local archives, because you think about historical resources. Newspapers for much of America's history were the best. They are the best historic resources that we have. If you want to know what people were thinking about the Civil War during or the pending Civil War during the year leading up to it, the newspapers that were published at that time, that is your best window into what was going on. What were people thinking? What was the world like then? And one thing that I have become concerned about with all the shifts in the media landscape is that because so much of media now is no longer physically printed. I mean, Compass is not physically printed unless somebody prints it out at home on their printer. It might, we might start to lose some of those resources for the future. And, I'm not saying that some large number of future historians are going to want to read about zoning disputes in Knox County in the 2020s, but somebody might, and it would be good for that to be available. And so I do think that's something we need to think about, but it's also something that these year in review stories kind of help provide on an ongoing basis. Like here's what happened in 2024, if you just want like a really quick look at it, and gives you some sense of sort of what was going on.
Yeah, and kind of where we are,
and
how, the things in the past year have shaped where we are now. Moving forward, for example, the county is going to be updating its zoning code. Well, that doesn't make sense unless you kind of at least are familiar with the history of Advanced Knox and the comprehensive plan and all that was passed earlier this year. So it can be pretty helpful for you, and we same with things that are going on with the city and the city election and the other things that are that have happened over the past year. It's a good way to get your bearings going into 2025.
2025 sounds like the future.
It does.
All right. Well, so those couple of year in review stories are on our website. If you are a subscriber, you can find them there and read them. If you are not a subscriber, hey, how about using some of that Christmas gift money you got, maybe, and taking a look at CompassKnox.com. Look at our subscription rates. They're very reasonable. Okay, Scott, University of Tennessee Economic Report. This is a report that the Boyd Center puts together every year. I think they are legally obligated to create this. I think this report is something that they have to provide to the governor as part of their annual workflow. What do they have to say about the Tennessee economy and where it's headed?
Yeah, well, the report basically says our economy is moderating, as they say. In other words, it's slowing down. We're still growing, but it's slowing down, and that's the main takeaway from the reports. Very
growing
long.
But slowing.
It's a good way to put it. It's that's a kind of a broad brush way to look at it, but that is the case. Or the GDP growth, which, one of the things that you got to remember, 2021, 2022, and into 2023 were really unusual years, and not just because, it all goes back to COVID, but it's not just because there was a disease moving around that were unfamiliar with. But it really, the economy, unlike the fears people had in 2020, the economy soared. GDP was up around the 10% mark.
Whole lot of government money.
A lot of government money. A lot of other money too. I mean, just people were spending their money, and the incomes went up. Once unemployment came back down, and unemployment's down, was down to historic levels earlier this year, down to 3%, which is unheard of, and it's still less than 4% right now.
Given the normal churn of people leaving jobs in any given week or month, 3% is functionally zero. I mean, that is about as close to quote unquote full employment as we can get.
Yeah, and the report goes into it's a very long report. There's a whole section on the national economy that quite frankly I didn't even read. Or not much of it. I scanned it. But most of it has to do with the state's economy and, where it is in regards to, in all things about the economy are kind of moderating. GDP's moderating. Employment is moderating because employment had been growing at a pretty good clip. It's moderating a little bit. Incomes are moderating. Everything is, that's the phrase that keeps popping up, or the word that keeps popping up, is moderating. And basically things are reverting back pretty close to what they were before the pandemic. And so while the economy is still growing, it's not growing as fast. While incomes are going up, they're not going up as fast. While unemployment is coming down, it's not coming down, it's not coming down at all really right now because it's as low as it can get. The workforce is not growing as fast. So, I mean, everything is still, and the one good thing that keeps popping up is for the most part, all these measures, Tennessee's doing better than the nation as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to hold true. This report talks about the state of the economy now, but it also looks ahead over the next decade, and it is still the whole outlook is Tennessee's economy is going to do okay. Growth's going to be slow and steady for the most part. But it's better than the nation as a whole,
right?
And then these all these
growing is better than contracting, at least as far as the economy goes.
One concern that was brought up in this report several times, and this report's kind of funny because it does repeat itself a little bit as you go through it, and that is the workforce. Tennessee has the population growth that we've seen is primarily driven from in-migration from other states. And that sounds great that people are moving here, but most of the people who are moving here are retired or close to retirement or scaling back. So they're not really joining the workforce.
They're not in the kind of dynamic parts of their careers. Right.
And so people who are moving here, obviously there are people who graduate from college in other states and move here, but the large numbers are coming here to retire, and so they're not joining the workforce. You couple that with low birth rates, especially during 2022 and 23, we actually had death rates were higher than birth rates in Tennessee. So it was, so you add that, and there is a worker shortage, and it's going to continue for the foreseeable future because we just the population isn't sustaining it, and it's really difficult because you've got all these open jobs, and there are plenty of open jobs. It's just you don't have people who can fill them who are in the workforce, and so that's been a real sticking point. But that population trend is one that that they kind of single out for concern, and one thing too that they talk about. They talked about it briefly, and Larry Kessler was the he's kind of in charge of this program for the Boyd Center, and had a Zoom press conference with him right after the report came out, right when the report came out. One of the things they didn't do was try to factor in the potential policies that the new presidential administration might throw in. So this is a huge caveat here. One of the things they mentioned was, okay, we really can't make predictions if we don't have the details. If we don't have the numbers, we can't really make predictions. And a lot of these things are kind of unknown. Not kind of unknown. They are unknown. The one scenario they mentioned was tariffs, because the incoming president has said, he's going to impose tariffs on China and Canada and Mexico and whoever, and he doesn't need congressional approval for that, so he can go ahead and do that. And of course, tariffs don't actually punish the company or the country that they're imposed on. They tend to punish consumers here in the United States.
Right,
because
costs get passed on to
yeah,
consumers.
Costs
all costs get passed on to consumers.
Yes, as with everything else. So when if there is a tariff, the importer ends up paying it and ends up raising prices, increases inflation, that sort of thing. So they said that's a thing to watch out for, but they don't include it in their forecast
because they don't know what's actually going to happen.
They don't know what's actually going to happen, and it could be one of those things where, Trump, who's been known to be a little bombastic at times, could say he's going to impose
the guy who is threatening to invade Greenland, maybe a little bombastic,
a little bit. But instead of he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to impose 25% tariffs on everybody," and he ends up not doing that, and maybe 5% tariff on things from Mexico or something like that. But you don't know. When you don't know those percentages, you don't know what the impact's going to be on the economy. So, they just don't know what that's going to do. Also, the whole intent for mass deportations, which is going to require a lot of congressional help if it gets done, and that's going to come with all kinds of costs and disruptions.
Yeah, talk about impact on the workforce.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is they talk about mass deportations and then turn around and say, well, we're going to focus on dangerous criminals. Well, first of all, they already focus on dangerous criminals.
Dangerous criminals are already routinely deported.
Yes. But, they're not real. I mean, they'll say, at the beginning of the talk that we're going to deport 11 million people who are here illegally, but then the only ones they actually talk about deporting are people who are criminals,
which is a tiny percentage,
very small percentage of immigrants who are here without proper documentation, which is actually the best way to phrase it rather than illegal. But
most of whom, the adults at least, are working.
Yes.
And they are an important part of the workforce. And there's just multiple analyses that show this. I mean, Bloomberg, the financial news outlet, did an analysis that showed that most of the growth in the U.S. population and the U.S. economy post-pandemic comes from immigration.
Yeah. Well, in this report, there's a lot of discussion about these huge construction projects that are going to drive increased employment in the construction sector. Plus, interest rates are coming down and they're anticipated to continue falling. We've had the supply chain disruptions have kind of ironed themselves out. Those disruptions caused by COVID. And you've got Blue Oval City in Memphis. You've got the new Titans Stadium in Nashville. You've got the uranium enrichment plant that's going to be built in Oak Ridge, and people don't realize how big of a deal that is. We got all these construction projects, and because they don't know the effect of this deportation thing, they can't factor in possible deportations of construction workers. Though I think we all realize that if they deported every construction worker who doesn't have proper documentation to be in the United States, nothing would get built.
Yeah. I mean, for real, if you can find a construction crew in East Tennessee, and I'm not talking about the supervisors or the people who own the companies.
What about these sling hammers?
Right. The people who are out there like doing the work every day. If you can find one of those crews where the dominant language is not Spanish, you will have found a rarity, because I mean, this is just anecdotal, but the crews and this has been true for more than a decade in East Tennessee, and I think across much of the country. If you go by any construction site and just spend any time watching and listening to people, or if you have hired a crew yourself, like we hired a crew of roofers earlier this year to put a new roof on our house, every single person on our roof spoke Spanish. The supervisor who we dealt with, spoke English, but that's just true across the board, and it does kind of. I mean, I think probably it's wise for economic forecasters to not try to take account of all of these things, precisely because what they say they're going to do sounds so implausible. Deporting 11, even I think what Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, Trump's immigration czars, have said is, well, we're going to start with 1 million people a year, which is still like, that's just a million people is a gigantic number. That's like 1 out of every 7.5 people in the state of Tennessee, for example. There's a lot of people. It just seems extremely unlikely. That doesn't mean that I don't think they're going to deport a lot of people and try to deport a lot of people. But if you are making an economic forecast based on, well, what's actually going to happen here, I think you just have to like throw up the white flag and say, we don't know. Yeah. We'll come back and look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, you can, on the one hand, you can look at it and say, well, it's a useless projection because it doesn't take into account what the incoming administration has said it will do, and only because the incoming administration is talking about such a radical change to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And unlike most new presidencies, things are tweaks on the status quo, but this is at least the rhetoric is anything but just a tweak, just a few tweaks here and there. So, but on the one hand, you can think, well, that's just kind of a cop out, or they're not, it's unrealistic, and that might be true. But it's also true that if they tried to forecast based on, verbal policy proposals that are made during the course of a political campaign, that's irresponsible too.
Yeah. So and they might end up with crazy looking results.
Oh yeah, and so I think that the they basically erred on the side of caution and said, oh, we'll just this is how things are going. This is if nothing changes or not much changes that we can't predict, this is what will end up happening.
All right. And you can find that full report on the website of the Haslam Business School. Is that what it is?
Yeah. And we don't have a full in-depth story on our website because we trickled out the
you did a series of items in the daily newsletter.
I did a series of items in the daily newsletter. That is a selling point for that newsletter because one of the things you do when you get a Compass subscription is you get a newsletter in your inbox every weekday morning.
That's really our most popular product, by the way.
And it really has everything to do with the GIF at the end of it. I think that's really what everybody loves about it.
That's what pulls it all together.
It's not the information; it's the wonderful GIF. There's always something great at the bottom
with a terrible joke of some kind. Or something.
I look forward to getting to the bottom of it every day for that, and so I read the whole thing every day for that.
Good.
All right, so you folks, you've heard it. Our producer Seth Barber does not care about the news. All he cares about is a little bit of entertainment, but that's okay.
That's right. That's what it's there for. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about Knox County Schools and their strategic plan. And if the words strategic plan threaten to put you into a deep slumber, I understand. Anybody who has ever engaged in a strategic planning exercise at a workplace or an institution or whatever knows that they can sometimes be sort of mind-numbing exercises in recycled platitudes and so forth. But the Knox County School Board actually, for the past 10 years at least, this really goes back to the era of former Superintendent Jim McIntyre, but the school board has been doing updated 5-year strategic plans on a regular basis. And those plans have had some pretty specific expectations and commitments. And so they are currently working on the next strategic plan because the one that they have right now expires in 2024. It was a 2019 to 2024 strategic plan. The board is planning to adopt a new 5-year plan next year. The assumption here, and they're really kind of building it around, it will reflect the vision and priorities of Superintendent John Ryswick, who, of course, the board hired during, since the last time they did a strategic plan. They have hired a new superintendent. He has set his key priorities, and a lot of what the board is talking about is going to reflect those. But they did an interesting exercise this fall in gathering public input on the strategic plan, just to kind of see what do people think about where Knox County Schools currently is and the goals that it has set, and then how well it is doing at meeting those goals. And so they hired a consultant to do this study. They did a survey for parents, a survey for teachers, and then a survey that was open to just anybody in the community, even if they didn't have any direct connection to the schools. They got a lot of response on the first two categories. 7,032 parents responded to the online survey, which, in a district with close to 60,000 kids, that's obviously a minority of families, but it's still a lot of people. I mean, 7,000 inputs is a lot of inputs. They got 2,628 staff responses from teachers and other staff. Also a good percentage. The total school employment is between 8,000 and 9,000. So, decent representation there. Only 260 community members responded. So that was a much smaller response pool. And the good news for Ryswick and the school board is that all of those groups gave high marks to the district's stated objectives. And those are, Ryswick has set these 4 priorities that he talks about all the time. You can find them on the website, on the school system website. And the 4 priorities are excellence in foundational skills, great educators in every school, career empowerment and preparation, and success for every student. So those 3 groups that they surveyed agreed by large majorities that those were the right things for the school system to be focused on. Majorities ranging from 87% to 98%, depending on the group responding, all said, yes, these are the things you should be focused on. We agree. Like, if you can do these things, then you will be doing your job. Like, that's what we want to see. So that was good. It's like, all right, you're driving in the right direction, basically. But like, how are you doing? How fast are you getting there? That was a lot more varied. And so, for example, on the providing excellence in foundational skills, which that's kind of like your core academics, like how well is the school system doing on that? 58% of staff thought that they were doing an acceptable or exemplary job at that. So that's just barely more than half of the people who actually work there think, yeah, we're really hitting the mark here. 59% of parents, so very similar, and 49% of community respondents thought the district was actually doing that. So, that on the one hand, I guess you could say, well, more than half of people think we're doing a good job. But on the other hand, you could say, well, less than 60%.
Yeah. It's still a pretty hefty number who don't believe you're making it down the road either quickly enough or with the
sufficient dedication,
yes,
and resources and everything that goes with it. The lowest category of those four priorities was the success for every student category, and this is where the school system that what they're talking about there is all of their efforts on behalf of particularly disadvantaged students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, students with disabilities, English language learners, like that. The whole universe of students with challenges, I guess you could say. Only 46% of parents and staff thought that the school system was actually providing success for every student. So less than half of parents, less than half of staff, less than half of teachers. So overall, the consultant who presented this to the board basically said, it looks like people are saying, yes, you're going in the right direction, but there are, as they like to say, there are opportunities. There are opportunities for improvement along the way.
Yeah, well, one thing that those last figures could indicate, they can indicate all kinds of things, but is that there are greater expectations on not just the school system, but on the students as well. And, having high expectations is, one of the kind of foundational things about actually attaining success is you've got these expectations. On the other hand, you've got to have the tools to reach those expectations. And that's, I think, where the disconnect is, that people don't think that these students are getting those supports to get to where they need to be, and whether that's coming from the school system or the home or from wherever you can, those are arguments that occur all the time, but. I think it is identifying what a lot of people perceive as a major problem.
And a second major problem that's identified, you're talking about providing resources to students. Parents and staff alike think the school system can do a better job of providing resources for teachers. Only 49% of parents agreed that the school system currently has highly effective educators in every classroom, which, granted, every classroom, that's a pretty high standard. If you want to have a great teacher in every classroom, I did not attend Knox County Schools. I attended school in Western New York State. We did not have great educators in every classroom in my school system, I can tell you. We had some.
Yes.
We had some great teachers who I loved. Great teacher in every classroom is an admittedly high bar. Nevertheless, only 49% of parents think that they currently have that, and only 43% of parents think that the district, quote, invests in its educators. So less than half of people think the school system spends enough money on salaries, other kinds of resources and supports for their teachers.
Well, they're backed up on that by, actual statistics.
Yes. Well, and the teachers themselves and staff members, only 49% of staff members who responded to the survey agreed with the statement that I feel valued by Knox County Schools. So that, when just under half of your employees And granted, these are just the ones who responded, but that's still, 2,600 people responded to this. Just under half of them agreed that they feel valued as an employer in any sector. I think that is a number that would cause some concern about, well, why do people not feel valued? The teachers provided some guidance on that because they gave more positive feedback about their school level supervision. Most teachers said they felt valued and supported by their colleagues and by their principals. So they're not responding to what's going on directly in their classroom at their schools or what is under the control of their schools. The biggest issue that they cited was just not having enough time to do their jobs. All of the things that they are expected to do, being able to do it within the hours that they actually get paid to do it. The majority of them said, no, I do not have enough time. I don't have enough support to actually get my work done. And so that was something that the consultant said, as you're looking at your strategic plan, again, he used the word opportunities. There may be some opportunities around workloads. And, teachers have been loaded up. Of course, teaching just, putting a person in front of a room full of kids of any age, K through 12, that in itself is a tremendous amount of work and effort and energy. The planning you have to do, the lesson planning, and then all of the grading and everything else. But as we all know, teachers' jobs have been increasingly complicated over the past several decades with both federal and state regulations. Teachers are now subject to more levels of supervision, evaluation, reports that they have to do on a whole range of different kinds of students.
And firearms training.
Well, and firearms training in some school districts. That's right. They keep giving.
Sorry about that.
No, it's true.
I couldn't resist.
It's true. That was one of the things that got talked about this year in Knox County Schools was whether to arm teachers, which at the moment they are not, as far as we know. But yeah, I think that was the biggest feedback that they got from staff members was just staff members feel overwhelmed with everything they are expected to do. So there will be further work on this. The school board will be developing and eventually adopting a strategic plan this year. I'm sure there will be a lot of discussion of it, and we will have further coverage of that as it happens. I also wanted to talk, while we're on schools, about the letter grades that the state gave out. They released these the Friday before Christmas or the Thursday before Christmas. And this is only the second year they've done this, where they assign a letter grade to every public school in the state, and it's based on a formula having to do with the academic performance on state tests of their students, the academic growth that those students show, truancy and absenteeism rates, and a couple of other factors, but those are the major ones. And Knox County Schools in the second year performed about like they did the first year. We talked about that last week. There were 18 schools out of nearly 90 in the district were given A's, and another 24 were given B's, whereas down at the bottom end, there were 22 schools that received either D's or F's. 6 of those were F's. So we've talked about this here before, but one of the problems with these kinds of evaluations is that they almost inevitably end up reflecting a lot about the socioeconomic makeup of the students in the school rather than, anything that happens in the school itself. And to try to get at how much of an impact that might be, we looked at the schools that received A's, those 18 A schools, and the 22 schools that received D's and F's, and just went through on their state report cards and looked at, there's a lot of different factors you can look at, but we looked at the economically disadvantaged number, and that is calculated based on the number of households that fall below certain income thresholds in each school. And the results were not surprising, but they are pretty striking. So if you look at those 18 schools that got A's, most, not all, but most of which are located in more affluent areas of the county, in more suburban and or rural areas of the county. There is a range in those schools of their percent of economically disadvantaged students. 3 of the schools, Bluegrass and Sequoia Elementary and Farragut Middle Schools, reported less than 5% economically disadvantaged, which is basically the lowest that number goes. Anything under 5, they just put less than 5. And those are all schools in quite affluent areas. The schools that got an A that had the highest percent, there were 3 schools that had 18% economically disadvantaged, which is a lot more than less than 5%. Obviously, you're getting up to almost 1 out of 5 students in the school is economically disadvantaged, and that's Gibbs Elementary, Career Magnet Academy, and West High. They all still got A's. But so that was the range. The socioeconomic, the economically disadvantaged range in the schools that got A's was from less than 5% to 18%. So in the schools and the average across those 18 was 10.5% of students were economically disadvantaged. So about 1 out of 10 in the A schools. In the D and F schools, the 22 schools that got D's and F's, first of all, only 4 of them have less than 20% economically disadvantaged students. That's Gibbs High, Gibbs Middle, Halls High, and Carnes High. So our kind of more rural high schools, their range of economically disadvantaged students were from 12 to 16% at those 4 schools. The other 18 schools that got D's and F's all have at least 20% economically disadvantaged students, going all the way up to 75% at Green Magnet, 78% at Maynard Elementary School. The average among the 22 schools that got D's and F's was 39% of students are economically disadvantaged. So in the schools that got A's, about 1 out of 10 students is economically disadvantaged. In the schools that got D's and F's, 4 out of 10, almost 4 times as many students are economically disadvantaged. So, this doesn't mean that that's the only thing that these numbers are reflecting, because there are some variations. You can find schools with similar levels. You have Halls High School with 12% economically disadvantaged getting an F. West High School with 18% economically disadvantaged is getting an A. You could look at those 2 schools and say, well, this is interesting. Why is there such a difference between these 2 particular schools? And there may be some interesting things you can see there. But the big picture is that overall, it's just clear, and this is going to be true in every county in the state. You could do the same analysis, and I promise you will find similar results. Having more kids from low socioeconomic backgrounds, which doesn't only mean that their families have less money, but it often, is correlated with a whole host of various kinds of socioeconomic challenges. That is going to give you a lower letter grade. And the thing that I personally wonder about this, we were talking about these teachers not feeling valued, for example, by your school district. Let's say you're teaching in one of these schools with very, very high numbers, 30, 40, 50% of students coming from these very challenging backgrounds. You are dealing with the effects of that every day in your classroom and managing it and trying to kind of keep everybody focused and moving forward and everything. And you don't have any control over who shows up at your school. The kids who are zoned there show up in your classroom, and you teach those kids. So you're there, you're doing that, you're dealing with the kids with all those challenges, and then the state of Tennessee comes and says, your school gets an F or your school gets a D. What impact does that have, on teachers, on students, on families who already have a lot of challenges to start with?
Yeah, it's, I can imagine it's pretty demoralizing to be told, oh, well, not only are you socioeconomically challenged, but you're failing as well. That's in one of the things, and this has been borne out by studies as well. Even the school, you talk about the schools that had 10% socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and that 10% in that school, they tend to do better than the individual students in the 45 to 75% schools there because of, and part of that it appears to be just they're with kids who value education and try hard. Therefore, so they take that on.
And there are fewer other high needs kids in each classroom demanding and consuming the teacher's attention. Yeah. And that makes a big difference, It does make a big difference. And if you're dealing with a classroom that has, or a school that has 10% of kids with the whole matrix of needs that come with the lower socioeconomic status, you can focus more on that 10%. If that number is 40%, or if it's 75%, each of those individual kids is competing with every one of those other kids who all have all of those needs.
And and one of the things that makes evident is that the way to improve your school system is to have fewer disparities in the community at large, where you don't have pockets where there are where 75% of the people are living in poverty, and you don't have pockets where 75% of the people are affluent as well. And so, of course, there's a lot that goes into that, a whole history of the United States and zoning and everything else that we don't have enough time to get into right now. But
they have very real effects.
They do have very real effects, and this it's one of the reasons that a lot of planners, look at mixed income developments as being healthier for the community at large, and it's a very compelling argument for that.
Well, like, for example, those two schools with the Green and Maynard that have the 75 and 78% economically disadvantaged, those two schools are located very close to large public housing developments. And so, of course, yes, they have a lot of kids from poorer families because that's who lives right there. Yeah. But if you look at, for example, the redevelopment of Austin Homes that's going on, which I think is in the Green Magnet school zone there, they are doing mixed income development there. And so they're replacing some of the public housing, but they're also bringing in other, apartments to appeal to a wider socioeconomic range. And
they're doing that at First Creek at Austin as well, which is right there too, and also feeds Vine Middle School. And, so it's, that is something that, at least in the public sphere, has been gathering momentum. That whole idea that, well, you have a range of incomes, and that makes for a healthier neighborhood. Is one of the things that they've talked about in some of the Chodo affordable housing complex that got shot down a year ago. Was one of the things they talk about is, well, these are people who work in Farragut. These are people who work in this area, and they can't afford to live here without this type of housing. That didn't save the complex from getting scuttled, but that was kind of the idea, is that these areas, these affluent areas of town, still need places where people who make modest incomes can live.
Yep. Well, it's looking at these numbers is just another good reminder, and this has been true for a long time. But when you hear people talk about quote unquote good schools and bad schools, a lot of what you're really talking about is just how many poor kids are there.
Yeah.
That's the biggest determinant of what people consider good schools and bad schools. Really does come down to socioeconomics. And that's what these, the state letter grades, they're trying to take a few other things into account, the academic growth factor, for example. But still, as just this quick look at the Knox County grades shows, a lot of what these grades are measuring is still just raw socioeconomics. It's just like who is actually enrolled at this school before the first before the first day of school starts, before the first teacher says the first thing to the kids, you're already starting with a lot of what that grade is going to be is already kind of predetermined by the socioeconomics. And we know this. We don't have to keep measuring it over and over again. So anyway, that's just a good thing to keep in mind, because now that the state is doing this, we're going to be hearing these grades every year. And I just think it's always good to remember what those grades really mean and probably don't mean. Okay, enough talking about school. Let's talk about weed. Lord Seth Barber, our producer, also happens to engage in commerce around cannabis products, among many other things. And Seth, my understanding of what has happened here is that a group of cannabis industry representatives, retailers, Tennessee Hemp Growers Coalition, filed a lawsuit against an interpretation by the State Department of Agriculture that basically threatens to make illegal a cannabis derivative called THCA that is very powerful, is the most popular, let's say.
Sure, that's accurate to say. I guess probably one of the easiest references I could probably assist with on this is we've had friends, or we personally have gone out of state for one reason or another, visiting family, something like that, 2 states that have legal recreational. And it is not uncommon in those places to have similar percentage content of THCA flower for sale at a Colorado retailer, for example.
Where they can sell any cannabis product they want, basically.
Well, sort of. There's some, like a number of the recreational states are really harsh on the derivatives.
Right.
Because they
like
don't fall
Delta
under
8
their tax,
isn't legal some places.
They don't fall under their taxable thing, and so they've banned those out of existence, which I guess makes sense for the tax purposes of things. But yes, there was a couple of lawsuits moving around that were of great interest to us in the industry. As you mentioned, the main issue is, or I think one of the main arguments in one of the lawsuits that had the most footing, I suppose to say, is the way the law was written. Is we use the phrase hemp-derived cannabinoids, HDC for short. Meaning things made out of hemp can include X percentage of the different cannabinoids that are at play. And so one of the arguments of the lawsuit is, and I always put a banana split example as my analogy for it, is if the state said they're going to regulate products that include bananas, they could regulate a banana split. But nowhere in that are they regulating bananas. And so the big thing with the THCA was a hemp product that is just hemp at most, broken down and divided into retailable units. So you're not selling a whole plant to somebody. We're taking it and harvesting the plant and then just selling divided units of it. It's not a derived product at that point. And so legally speaking, the argument is the state didn't give you permission to regulate this.
Right.
They gave you permission to regulate things that are made with this. And it's a very fine line argument, but obviously a potent one. And this was a Davidson County court. And
Davidson County Chancellor, I believe.
Right. And following through all the parts and pieces of it, it seemed to me that a bigger portion of her decision was about economic loss. Going to some of the economic conversation we had earlier, is that one of the questions she asked in one of the hearings was, will there be damages to the community from interpreting this law this way? And both the states, both the state's attorney as well as the different attorneys that play for the hemp industry basically produced some numbers on how much economic loss, both directly for businesses as well as employment loss, for how many places would either fully shut down or could significantly reduce staff. And it was a big number throughout the state. I had a conversation with one of the guys locally from one of the inspectors units, and it's like, I would probably half my staff if we lost this product. It's a significant portion of what we do. It's a little bit more labor intensive as well. And so, it takes more effort for us to sell that than some of the other stuff. And so taking those two factors in, I'd probably cut about half my staff. I'd need to cut half my staff to survive if this law was going to go through. So it seemed like that was a big part of the decision process for the judge in this case.
And to be clear, what the judge did was just a couple days before Christmas issue a stay against this rule, which I think was supposed to take effect on the 26th.
Right. It was right. It was a real fun, real way to relax into the holiday spirit for me and some of my friends. Is that we were expecting a decision on Christmas Eve for a rule that would go into place on the day after Christmas, and so potentially there was part of me in the back of my head was like I was going to spend Christmas Day going in and pulling product that I couldn't sell in the future, or I couldn't sell when we reopened after Christmas.
But now you have until
I have till mid-February.
February 18th, I think.
Mid-February is to play it. My assumption on it, and I don't know this for a fact, but my assumption on it is there's kind of hope that it's going to kind of get pushed back into the legislation to clarify what they said. So likely, my guess on it as a non lawyer person looking into all this, my guess on it is it's probably going to stay till July, and they'll let the state clarify it, and then whatever the state clarifies it to will kick in on that July 1 date with all the other new
So if there is new legislation, I'm sure that the fight will then move back out of the courts, back to the legislature between the hemp industry representatives and the various people who think that this should be more restricted.
Right. That's what it seems like to me, is that I think this judge didn't want to put the harm to the community and get all these job losses that are assumed to happen with it, and the economic loss that's assumed to happen with it. They didn't want that on them. They wanted to make that a legislative decision and make the legislation make the clear distinction on what is and what isn't, and then move forward. It's what it seems like. I don't know. I haven't talked to her personally, but I would if she gave me the shot. But that's kind of where I see right now. So that, like you said, February 18th is the new deadline, which will. I mean, this has been my life for 2 years now, that we're just waiting on the next thing or the next clarification or the next adjustment, and it's real frustrating. It's hard to be. There's not much worse you could say to a customer, like, I don't know if you can buy this tomorrow or not.
Right.
And then continuously say that, because at some point they're just like, okay, well, then I'll just go to my friend around the corner instead of coming to buy it legally here and collect taxes and do all this stuff. It's just easier because I know my guys got it, whether it's legal or not, than taking the time to come to see you to see if you have it today or tomorrow or whatever. So, we're waiting again. That's just what we do.
Well, it's the ongoing sort of weird gray zone that Tennessee is in on THC products, as, outright legalization of marijuana for medical and or recreational purposes has continued apace across the country, and I think has passed anywhere that it's been put up for a public referendum.
I see,
but we're not going to have a public referendum on it here in Tennessee.
Right. I see the eventuality of what the lottery was back in the 90s here. If anybody remembers that, if anybody's old enough, when Tennessee brought the lottery in, that was not because we, quote unquote, as citizens wanted it, or even we as our legislature wanted it. It was the realization of how much money Tennesseans were driving out of state to spend, and how much tax revenue Kentucky, Virginia, Georgia, Mississippi were getting off of all these different. Like, I remember doing it in high school. We sent a friend who was 18 up to Corbin to buy a Powerball ticket, like $200. A bunch of us pitched in together because it was one of the big Powerballs at the time. And that was my understanding of what brought the lottery in, and that's my assumption of the long term in this game, is that because Kentucky starts Wednesday with a medical, I believe.
Yep.
Virginia already had some stuff in place. North Carolina's got some stuff coming down the pipeline. It's going to come. You're going to be able to go very quickly out of state.
Well, and it does provide a new source of tax revenue without having to raise taxes on anything except that. And, you can treat it like a sin tax like they do with alcohol. And it's something that, our legislators don't like taxing things, but they do like taxing things they don't like.
Right.
One of the things they don't like is cannabis, evidently.
And I think while we're on it, and this is a personal side of mine, but while we're on it, one of the things that bothers me most is one of the arguments for the law in the first place was underage consumption issues, which it's on my list of things to do for my podcast. I do want to get some data out of KPD and Knox County Sheriff's Office on their sting operations, making sure of age purchasing is required at all these different places, which we all do. Most of us do anyway. I assume all of us, but the argument from Briggs and some of the other people when this first round of this bill was going through was that we're trying to keep this out of the hands of kids, because there is good data on, younger kids getting into marijuana use, having some serious long-term issues out of it. We don't deny that as an industry at all. But my take on it, my stance and my understanding the best I can is 90% of any kid that's getting it, it's not getting it from a local shop. They're buying it online, which won't go away if this law goes in the way they want it to. So I don't see that. This isn't fixing that problem, in my opinion. But we'll see as it gets kicked back to legislature what they do about it. So
they're buying it online,
wait and see,
or they're getting it from their friend's older brother's buddy, who,
right?
the way
we all got
the way that
cigarettes when we
people
were
have
kids.
been getting.
It's good enough for our generation. Right? It's good enough for these guys.
Yeah. Well, and so the other thing that happened right before Christmas along these same lines was there was a settlement in another lawsuit brought by two specific retailers in Columbia, Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, who had sued the Spring Hill Police Department for coming in and seizing a bunch of their legal products under apparently the guidance of the district attorney there, who made some sort of proclamation essentially saying, I don't care what the state says, this stuff is marijuana and it's illegal and we can take it. So they went and seized, the retailer said they seized more than $1 million, I think $1.3 million worth of goods. They sued them, and it didn't even go to trial because obviously cooler legal heads looked at this and said, no, yeah, like what these guys are doing is, I know it looks like marijuana. I know it smells like marijuana. I know that it is intoxicating, to one level or another. Nevertheless, it is legal. And so those two outlets settled that suit against the state and against the city of Spring Hill for, I think, $735,000, which just reinforces, at least for now, that yes, these are legal products. This is legal commerce, and no, the cops can't just walk into your store and like take all your stuff off the shelves.
Right. And that's one of the issues that concerns me most is that it's so convoluted and complicated and specific on what we can and can't do, but it's not clear specific, if that makes sense. And that it would be totally understandable for me if a TBI agent or even a KPD officer came in, saw the stuff, leapt to a conclusion, made an action, and puts KPD or whomever's office at risk of lawsuit and stuff like that, because the specific numbers that we are allowed to and not allowed to sell and stuff like that are very specific. However, John Q. officer's not likely going to know those specificities well. He's going to jump to the conclusion of X, Y, or Z, and then we have further lawsuits and issues, and we're going to put more complications in place. And on non-great authority, I could say that a number of police that I've spoken to are just like, we don't really care.
Yeah.
Like, we're not, like, that's not something we're going to mess with. I feel
like
it's
cannabis
attached to
enforcement overall is not a gigantic priority for a lot of law enforcement.
If it's something that's attached to something else, we may use it in whatever, but they're not going to seek that specific item out.
Well, and if we pull you over in your car and you've got a bale of marijuana, like, you're still going to be in trouble.
Which is one of the ones that really bothers me about that law. You brought it up. I'm sorry. I know we were trying to close the topic, but one of the ones that really bothers me, so anybody who is using legal product in the state of Tennessee, you're obliged by the law to keep your packaging with you. That's your way to prove that it's legal. Which I didn't think was how our country worked.
Right.
I thought it was their job to prove your guilt, not your job to prove your innocence. But it's specifically written in there, and we'll see if somebody tries that part in some future lawsuit. Yeah. But
keep your
drives
packaging.
Me crazy, that one little specific part. But anyway, thank you for letting me wax on that for a little while.
Well, it was a bit of a green Christmas for our cannabis retailers here in town, even if they still may be up for a big chill coming in February. We'll see. Okay, enough puns for now. Scott, we should talk about Compass.
Yes, we should. There are going to be some changes that people will see moving forward after 6.5 years.
Almost 6.5. 6 years and 3 or 4 months, however long we've been doing this. We started Compass in 2018. Scott and I have been co-publishers and co-reporters ever since. However, starting this coming week, January 1st, I am transitioning out of my current role with Compass. I'm basically going to be pulling back from my editorial contributions. I will continue to be I guess, a junior partner in the enterprise, and will in particular be taking care of the back end of the operation, the business side, and our assorted ongoing technical issues, trying to make sure everybody gets their email every day. Surprisingly challenging task. So
one of those things we didn't realize when we started, that it was going to take
I've learned a lot about email, and mostly what I've learned about email is it's really complicated, and we don't have very much control over it at all. But I will still be involved with Compass. I still very much care about Compass. I want Compass to succeed, and I will be working kind of in the background, maybe chipping in a little bit here and there. But I have another project that I am getting ready to start that I'm not going to go into right now, but in the near future, I will be talking more about that. Another media project that won't in any way conflict with anything Compass does, has a little bit of a different focus. So you can watch or listen for news and information about that. Maybe it'll get talked about on a future Compass Points podcast. Who knows? Maybe I will come back as a guest on a future Compass Points podcast to talk about it, because also I am not going to be here at this podcast every week from now on. Scott's going to be running it, and is already making some plans to have some other voices involved too. But I don't know. I guess that's really all to say about that.
Well, one thing I want to say is whether you get to come back or not depends on how bitter I am that you are pulling that.
That's right.
I'm kidding. You know that I hope that your new venture does very well. One thing I do want people to know is that in some ways Compass is not going to change much at all, and that's the kind of the focus. The sensibility. Yes, we have added in recent months. We've added correspondence. Basically, it's going to take like 4 people to replace Jesse, as far as on the editorial side. But they're going to be there. As Jesse said, a lot of the sensibility of Compass comes from Jesse's contributions, and that's still going to be there. If anybody thinks I'm not going to call Jesse and talk to him on a regular basis about various decisions that need to be made editorially, they're crazy. I'd be a fool to ignore his knowledge and his contributions to Compass. But there will be some minor changes, especially in the hopefully you won't see much of a difference. We're still going to be covering, city, county government, schools, UT, business development, those kinds of things. It's just we're going to have quite a few other people who are going to help contribute those editorial pieces. In as far as the podcast goes, it's going to be real different because Jesse is much more comfortable and smoother than I am on doing the podcast, but I will endeavor to pick up the mantle and move forward. There will be changes to how we actually the kind of the format of this, and in some ways, hopefully that we will be able to bring in some other voices and it will evolve. Though I will tell you that the next episode will not be will be different from the one episode 6 months from now, because there'll be a little bit of trial and error to see how this goes as a solo flight rather than a 2-person team. So, but I do want to make sure that people realize that while Jesse's byline won't be in Compass, his spirit sure will be. So,
well, I will be happy to continue to contribute in any ways I can, and always happy to consult for sure. Help provide guidance on local issues to our local writers or our contributors, and all of that. And I have very much enjoyed this. And I'm going off to start something new. but I do still have a foot in here at Compass. And, sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't. Who knows? Maybe a year or two from now, I'll be coming back to Scott asking for my job back.
Crawling back.
That's right.
And in the meantime, you can just use him as cheap labor as often as possible because he's going to be cheaper than any of your other correspondents out there.
Well,
I'd pay him half as much per word, I think. Yeah, I'm just saying.
Anyway, I am confident that Compass is in good shape right now. We have added these other contributors recently who are all doing good work for us, and several of them are committed to continuing to provide that kind of coverage. So I'm Godspeed, and I will have more news about what I'm going to be spending my time doing soon. Okay, well, I guess we are to the part of the podcast where we look ahead to the coming week. And once again, there's not much going on.
No, well, it's the twilight zone between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
And the only thing we've really got going on is New Year's Eve.
Tuesday, New Year's Eve, Wednesday, New Year's Day. There are a lot of course, events happening in and around downtown and other parts of the city to celebrate New Year's Eve. If you are the type to go out and celebrate the holiday, do it safely and warmly. And I think, like Scott, I will probably be observing it from the comfort of my couch.
But if you do want to go out, of course, there's the biggest New Year's Eve bash that goes on is the city's New Year's Eve celebration in World's Fair Park. They have music. They have you got all the things you want to do downtown. There's still going to be ice skating in Market Square. You got all that good stuff.
And they drop a ball at the Sunsphere. They do not drop the Sunsphere, sadly. That is not mechanically possible.
Yeah, that would be kind of neat if there was a way they could do that. But no, they drop lights from the Sunsphere sphere down to the bottom. But it is a community New Year's celebration. So if you want to get out in the community and celebrate, that's a good place to go. Whatever you do, we hope you're safe doing it.
All right, and guess that wraps us up. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production duties here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and Scott Barker will be back here to talk to you in 2025.
Absolutely, and I'm
welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com.
I guess this is it for you, Jesse. So
CompassKnox.com is your best source.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.